6 months after Kirathul first asked if she could give the obstacle course a try, the galaxy found itself facing exactly the kind of threat that made integration not just advantageous, but essential for survival. The alert came at 0347 local time, jolting Morrison from sleep in his new quarters at Coalition Strategic Command. Red lights bathed the corridors as he rushed to the operations center, where Admiral Chen was already coordinating with fleet commanders across 3 sectors. "Colonel, we have a situation," the Admiral said without preamble. "Long-range sensors have detected a massive hegemony fleet moving toward the Kepler system. Initial assessment suggests they're using new technology we haven't seen before, some kind of adaptive shielding that renders our standard weapons significantly less effective." Morrison studied the tactical display, noting the formation patterns and ship configurations. "What's the timeline?" 36 hours until they reach Kepler's outer defenses. The system has 4 billion inhabitants across 6 worlds, including a major shipyard facility. "We cannot let it fall." "Conventional response options?" Admiral Chen's expression was grim. "Our fleet commanders estimate a 60% chance of successfully defending the system using standard tactics. Given the stakes, those odds are unacceptable." Morrison felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. "You want to deploy the integration units?" "I want to deploy everything we have, Colonel. Your integrated teams have been training for 6 months. Their capabilities are documented and proven. The question is whether they're ready for actual combat against an enemy that represents an existential threat to the coalition." Around the operations center, staff officers from a dozen different species worked at control stations, coordinating the largest military response in coalition history. Morrison noticed that the mixed species teams operated with an efficiency that single-species units couldn't match, the very principle that Project Integration had demonstrated on a smaller scale. "Sir, I'd like to recommend a specific deployment strategy," Morrison said. "Rather than using the integrated units as conventional forces, we should employ them as force multipliers embedded with traditional units. Their analytical and optimization capabilities could enhance the effectiveness of our entire response." Admiral Chen considered this. "Explain." Morrison activated a holographic display showing fleet formations. "Standard doctrine calls for massed fleet engagement at the system's edge. But our Nexari logistics specialists have identified supply vulnerabilities in the hegemony formation. Our Zalani analysts have calculated optimal targeting priorities that could cascade through their defensive systems, and our Kitharin engineers have developed countermeasures for their adaptive shielding. And the implementation? Integrated teams aboard each major vessel, providing real-time analysis and optimization during combat. Human instincts for tactical adaptation, combined with alien analytical capabilities, could allow our conventional forces to perform far beyond their documented specifications." Admiral Chen was quiet for several seconds, then nodded. "Make it happen, Colonel. You have 12 hours to deploy your teams and brief the fleet commanders on integration protocols." The next 12 hours passed in a blur of activity that tested every system and protocol project integration had developed. Mixed species teams were shuttled to coalition vessels throughout the fleet, carrying specialized equipment designed for their unique capabilities. Morrison found himself aboard the flagship Defiance, coordinating between Admiral Chen and the integration team led by Kirathul. As the coalition fleet approached the Kepler system, the true scale of the hegemony threat became apparent. The enemy formation consisted of more than 200 vessels, including ship classes that didn't match any known configurations. Their adaptive shielding technology created energy signatures that shifted constantly, making them difficult to target effectively. "Analysis?" Admiral Chen asked as the fleets moved into engagement range. Kirathul studied the tactical displays with the focused intensity Morrison had learned to recognize. "Enemy formation appears optimized for conventional engagement tactics. They are counting on their adaptive shielding to negate our firepower advantage, while their superior numbers allow for overwhelming assault." Recommendations? Zephyrdhan, who had been coordinating with the fleet's tactical computers, looked up from his station. "Standard engagement protocols will fail. Enemy adaptation capabilities will counter our weapons' effectiveness within the first 10 minutes of combat. However, we have identified 17 critical vulnerabilities in their formation that could be exploited simultaneously." Crystal Singer, the Kitharin engineer, added through its translation device. Adaptive shielding technology shows predictable harmonic patterns. Coordinated frequency modulation across all fleet weapons could create resonance cascade failure. Morrison watched as Admiral Chen absorbed information that would have taken human analysts hours to compile and verify. Implementation timeline? Immediate, Sympathia, the Vorthan healer, said unexpectedly. Everyone turned to her in surprise. She rarely contributed to tactical discussions. Emotional scent from enemy formation indicates confidence in current approach. Window for surprise advantage closing rapidly. Admiral Chen made the decision that would define the battle. All units implement Integration Protocol 7. Embedded teams are now tactical coordinators for their respective vessels. Admiral Chen to all ships, trust your integration teams and follow their recommendations without question. What followed was unlike any space battle in recorded history. Instead of the massive, chaotic melee that characterized most fleet engagements, the coalition forces moved with unprecedented coordination and precision. Each vessel targeted specific vulnerabilities identified by its integration team, while weapons frequencies were modulated according to Kithaeron, calculations that turned the enemy's adaptive, shielding against itself, human. Tactical creativity combined with alien analytical precision created opportunities that neither species could have identified alone. Zilani predictive modeling allowed coalition forces to anticipate hegemony maneuvers, while human adaptability enabled instant responses to unexpected developments. The breakthrough came 43 minutes into the engagement, when the coordinated frequency modulation achieved the resonance cascade that Crystal Singer had predicted. 17 hegemony vessels lost their shielding simultaneously, creating gaps in their formation that human tactical instincts immediately exploited. All units, execute Breakthrough Protocol Alpha, Admiral Chen commanded, and the coalition fleet poured through the gaps like water through a broken dam. The battle lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. When it was over, the hegemony fleet had been completely destroyed, with coalition losses at less than 8%, a casualty rate that military historians would later describe as miraculous. In the aftermath, as rescue operations proceeded and damage assessments were compiled, Morrison found himself standing on the bridge of the Defiance next to Kirathul, watching as coalition vessels worked together with an efficiency that had become natural during the battle. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "I think you got your answer." Kirathul's scales shimmered with colors Morrison had learned indicated deep satisfaction. "About what, Colonel?" "About whether you could give it a try." "The obstacle course was just the beginning, wasn't it?" "Everything is just the beginning, Colonel. The question is whether we have the wisdom to continue building on what we have started." Admiral Chen approached, her expression showing the exhaustion and relief that followed major combat operations. "Colonel Morrison, I'll be recommending that Project Integration be expanded into a permanent coalition military doctrine. The performance advantages are undeniable." Morrison nodded but found himself thinking about the larger implications. "Admiral, I think we've discovered something more important than just military effectiveness. We've learned that when different species work together as equals, they become something greater than the sum of their parts." "HFY indeed," Admiral Chen said with a slight smile. "Humanity, yeah. But maybe now it's coalition, yeah." Kirathul's translation device conveyed what Morrison suspected was alien laughter. "In Zilani, we would say, diversity through unity brings triumph. But your human expression has a certain elegance." As Morrison looked out at the mixed species crews working together throughout the fleet, he realized that the small alien diplomat who had asked to try the obstacle course had not just broken a record, she had broken the barriers that limited what any of them could become. The galaxy was still dangerous, and greater threats would certainly emerge. But now they would face those challenges not as separate species with distinct limitations, but as an integrated civilization that had learned to combine their unique strengths into something unprecedented and unstoppable. Sometimes the most profound revolutions began with the simplest questions. "Can I give it a try?" 3 weeks later, the Coronado base had transformed into something unprecedented in coalition military history. A steady stream of shuttles brought personnel from across the galaxy, not just Zilani, but representatives from 6 other coalition species, each carrying authorization from their respective governments to participate in what was now Officially designated as Project Integration. Morrison found himself promoted to colonel overnight and placed in command of the most diverse military unit ever assembled. His staff meetings now included beings he had only seen in diplomatic contexts. Kitharan engineers whose crystalline exoskeletons housed some of the most advanced technical minds in the galaxy. Vorthan medics whose empathic abilities could diagnose injuries before symptoms appeared. And Nexari logistics specialists who could coordinate supply chains across multiple star systems simultaneously. The catalyst for this rapid expansion had been the first joint exercise between human SEALs and Kirathul's team. What was supposed to be a simple hostage rescue simulation had turned into a demonstration of capabilities that left Coalition High Command scrambling to reassess every military doctrine they had developed over the past century. The integration was seamless. Colonel Morrison reported during a secure video conference with Admiral Chen, the Coalition Supreme Commander. Human aggression and adaptability paired with Zilani analytical precision created tactical solutions we had never considered. The hostage rescue was completed in 40% of the expected time, with 0 casualties and minimal collateral damage. Admiral Chen, a stern woman who had commanded coalition forces through 3 major conflicts, leaned forward on the screen. "Colonel, I've seen the preliminary reports, but I need you to be specific. What exactly are we looking at here?" Morrison activated a holographic display showing the mission breakdown. The human team provided rapid assault capabilities and tactical flexibility. When the situation changed mid-mission, they adapted instantly. The Zilani team provided real-time analysis and optimization, calculating optimal breach points, predicting enemy movements, and coordinating timing with mathematical precision. And the result? Sir, they performed as a single organism. The human's ability to improvise was enhanced by Zilani predictive analysis, while Zilani efficiency was accelerated by human instinctive decision-making. The combination produced capabilities neither species possesses alone. Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Colonel, the implications of what you're describing extend far beyond military applications. If species integration can produce this kind of performance enhancement, it changes everything about how we structure coalition society." "Yes, sir. But there's more. The other species representatives have been observing and requesting to participate. Initial assessments suggest similar integration possibilities across multiple species combinations." That evening, Morrison walked through the expanded training facility, observing scenes that would have seemed impossible a month earlier. In one area, human and Kitharan engineers worked together on equipment modifications, the aliens' technical precision combining with human innovation to produce hybrid technologies that neither species could have developed alone. At the medical bay, Dr. Chen collaborated with a Vorthan healer named Sympathia, whose empathic abilities allowed for injury diagnosis and treatment protocols that revolutionized field medicine. The alien could sense internal injuries, infection, and even psychological trauma with an accuracy that human medical technology couldn't match. The most dramatic changes were in the Tactical Planning Center, where Nexari logistics specialists worked with human strategic planners to develop operation protocols that accounted for variables neither species had previously considered. The Nexari could process supply chain complexities that would overwhelm human planners, while humans provided the creative strategic thinking that made those logistics serve tactical objectives. But it was at the advanced training course that Morrison witnessed something that truly amazed him. Kirathul was leading a mixed squad of humans and Zilani through a complex infiltration exercise, and their coordination had evolved beyond anything seen in the early trials. Lieutenant Torres, the former obstacle course record holder, moved through the simulated enemy facility with confidence that came from knowing his Zilani partner. Zephyrdhan was calculating optimal routes and threat assessments in real time. Meanwhile, Zephyrdhan executed complex technical tasks, with precision enhanced by Torres's instinctive understanding of human enemy psychology. "It's like they're thinking with one mind," Chief Williams observed, joining Morrison at the observation window. "But they're still distinctly human in Zilani. They haven't lost their individual capabilities. They've enhanced them." Morrison nodded, watching as the mixed squad accomplished objectives that would have challenged twice as many single-species operators. "Chief, I think we're seeing the evolution of warfare itself. Not just new tactics or new technology, but a fundamental change in what military forces can be. The exercise concluded with complete success, and Morrison gathered the participants for debriefing. The room contained humans, Zelani, Kitharans, Vorthans, and Nixari, all looking exhausted but exhilarated. Analysis? Morrison asked. Kira Thule stepped forward, her scales shimmering with what he had learned indicated satisfaction. Integration efficiency has improved by 37% since our first joint exercise. Communication protocols are approaching optimal, and tactical coordination is exceeding all projected parameters. Torres nodded agreement. Sir, it's like having a computer in your head that actually understands what you're trying to accomplish. No offense to our AI systems, but this is completely different, Zephyr Dan added. Human intuition provides solutions to problems our analysis might never identify, while our calculations allow humans to execute those solutions with unprecedented precision. The Kitharan engineer, a being called Crystal Singer, contributed through its translation device. Technical integration possibilities expand exponentially when creative innovation combines with systematic precision. Human engineering approach plus Kitharan material science equals capabilities beyond simple addition. Morrison realized he was looking at the future of coalition military power, but also at something much larger. This wasn't just about winning wars. It was about what different species could become when they worked together as equals rather than operating in separate, limited roles. The question, he said to the assembled group, is whether the coalition is ready for this kind of change. Integration requires trust, shared command structures, and abandoning the assumptions we've operated under for generations. Sympathea, the Vorthan healer, spoke with the musical voice characteristic of her species. Fear sent from coalition leadership growing stronger. Change resistance patterns indicate significant political obstacles to expansion of integration programs. But combat effectiveness speaks louder than politics, Torres pointed out. When the next serious threat emerges, these capabilities could mean the difference between victory and catastrophe. Morrison accessed his secure communicator, knowing he had a report to write that would determine the future of not just this program, but potentially the entire structure of coalition military forces. The data was undeniable, the results were extraordinary, but the political and cultural implications were staggering. As he looked around at the mixed group of species who had become the most effective military unit he had ever commanded, Morrison realized that they had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. The question now was whether the rest of the coalition would have the courage to follow them into this new paradigm, or whether fear and tradition would limit them to the very human capabilities that had brought them this far. The stakes, he knew, were nothing less than the survival of free civilization in a galaxy that was becoming increasingly dangerous. The underwater demolition course had been designed to push human physiology to its absolute limits. Candidates had to navigate a submerged obstacle course while holding their breath, plant simulated explosive charges at designated points, and return to the surface within a strictly enforced time limit. The current record of 4 minutes and 53 seconds had been set by a former Olympic swimmer who had trained for months specifically for this challenge. Morrison stood at the edge of the training pool, watching the replay footage on a waterproof tablet while Chief Williams provided commentary. The video showed Zephyr-Dan and Niravel moving through the underwater course with an efficiency that seemed to defy physics. Watch this part, Williams said, pointing at the screen. See how they move? It's like they're not even affected by water resistance. And look at their precision with the charges. Perfect placement every time, even in zero visibility conditions. On the screen, Niravel navigated through a maze of underwater obstacles that would challenge an experienced cave diver. Her movements were smooth and controlled, showing no signs of the panic or disorientation that affected most candidates. More importantly, she showed no signs of oxygen deprivation even after 3 minutes underwater. What were their times? Morrison asked, though he suspected the answer would be extraordinary. Zephyr-Dan finished in 3 minutes, 41 seconds. Niravel beat him by 6 seconds. Neither of them seemed even slightly winded when they surfaced. Dr. Chen approached with her medical scanner and a collection of data tablets. Commander, I've completed the physiological assessments of all 3 visitors. The results are unlike anything in our medical database. Morrison gestured for her to continue. Their lung capacity is 30% larger than the human average relative to body size, but that's just the beginning. Their blood carries oxygen more efficiently. Their muscle tissue can operate anaerobically for extended periods without lactate buildup, and their nervous systems process spatial information at roughly twice human speed. Are they genetically enhanced? Morrison asked. No, this appears to be natural Zilani physiology, or at least a subset of it. But here's the interesting part. When I compared their scans to the medical data we have on other Zilani from previous diplomatic contacts, there are significant differences. These three are exceptional even by their own species standards. Morrison found Kirathul on the observation deck overlooking the main training area, watching a group of SEAL candidates practice team coordination exercises. She seemed to be taking mental notes on human group dynamics and leadership structures. Ambassador, I think it's time for complete honesty, Morrison said, joining her at the railing. Your people aren't just observers, are they? Kirathul continued watching the training exercise for a moment before responding. No, Commander, we are not. Though everything we have told you is technically accurate. Technically accurate isn't the same as truthful. No, it is not. She turned to face him, her amber eyes reflecting what he was beginning to recognize as respect. The Zilani Strategic Assessment Division is indeed responsible for evaluating military capabilities across coalition species. However, we are also tasked with identifying exceptional individuals within our own population who might serve in combat roles. Morrison felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Your recruiters. We are many things, Commander. Yes, we identify and train individuals who show aptitude for military service. But we are also genuine researchers, studying human methods to improve our own training protocols. And we are diplomats, because what we are proposing represents a fundamental shift in coalition military structure. How many others are there? People like you and your colleagues? Currently? Perhaps 300 Zilani across the entire coalition territory. But our population is vast, and we have only recently begun systematic identification and training programs. The potential numbers are much larger. A commotion from the training area below caught their attention. One of the team coordination exercises had gone wrong, with a candidate making a tactical error that would have been costly in real combat. The instructors immediately stopped the exercise for analysis and correction. Your training methods are effective but inefficient, Kirathul observed. Human psychology requires the stress and competition, but other species might benefit from different approaches, such as collaborative analysis rather than competitive pressure, pattern recognition training instead of repetitive drilling, integrated systems thinking rather than isolated skill development. She gestured toward the exercise below. That error occurred because the candidate was thinking about his individual performance rather than the team objective. Zilani psychology would approach the problem differently. Morrison realized she was offering insights that could improve human training, while simultaneously gathering intelligence on their methods. It was sophisticated multi-level thinking that impressed him despite his wariness. Commander, Dr. Chen's voice came through his communicator. You need to get down to the marksmanship range. Something's happening that you won't believe. They found a crowd gathered around the precision shooting course, where Zephyr Dan was demonstrating marksmanship skills that challenged the fundamental assumptions about accuracy and human limitations. The targets were set at distances that typically required spotting scopes, but the Zilani was hitting them consistently with iron sights. It's not just his accuracy, explained Master Chief Santos, the senior marksmanship instructor. It's his analysis. He's calculating wind speed, humidity, target movement, and ammunition characteristics in his head, making adjustments that would take our best snipers minutes to work out with computers. Zephyr fired another shot, then stepped back from the weapon. Your marksmanship training focuses heavily on mechanical precision and repetitive muscle memory. Both valuable, but they neglect the computational aspects of ballistics. Zilani neural architecture processes multiple variables simultaneously, allowing for real-time adjustment calculations. Are you saying your people are natural-born snipers? Santos asked. I am saying that different species have different cognitive strengths. Humans excel at pattern recognition and adaptability under pressure. Zilani excel at complex mathematical analysis and systematic optimization. Combining these strengths could produce results superior to either species alone. Morrison felt the implications hitting him like a physical force. You're not just proposing Zelani military units. You're proposing integrated human-alien teams. The galaxy is becoming more dangerous, Commander, Kira Thule said quietly. The hegemony forces that attacked Proxima were more advanced than anything we had previously encountered. Their technology, their tactics, their coordination, all superior to current coalition capabilities. If we continue to fight as separate species with distinct roles, we will eventually lose. But if we combine our capabilities, Zephyr Dan added, we become something new. Something that cannot be predicted or countered by enemies who see us as separate, limited species. Niravel emerged from the equipment shed where she had been examining human tactical gear. Your equipment is robust but heavy. Zelani engineering could reduce weight by 40% while improving functionality. Human tactical doctrine is aggressive but sometimes wasteful. Zelani analysis could optimize resource utilization while maintaining effectiveness. Morrison looked around at the faces of his instructors and candidates, seeing a mixture of excitement, uncertainty, and professional curiosity. These were people who had dedicated their lives to military excellence, and they were being shown possibilities they had never imagined. What exactly are you proposing? He asked. A pilot program, Kira Thule replied. Joint training exercises between selected human and Zelani personnel. Shared development of integrated tactics and equipment, proof of concept for multi-species military units. And if it works, then the coalition survives the coming conflicts. If it fails. She paused, her scale shifting to darker colors. Then we continue as before, and hope that human capabilities alone will be sufficient against whatever threats emerge from the outer systems. Morrison realized that his quiet training facility had become the center of a revolution that would reshape warfare across the galaxy. The question was whether humanity was ready to share their role as the coalition's primary military force, or whether pride would blind them to the advantages of cooperation. The afternoon sun was setting, but Morrison suspected this was actually the dawn of something entirely new. The next morning brought an unusual energy to the Naval Special Warfare Training Center. Word of Kira Thule's record-breaking performance had spread beyond the base, reaching all the way to Coalition High Command. Morrison found his secure comm system flooded with messages from superior officers demanding explanations, reports, and immediate video documentation. Kira Thule arrived for the second day of her visit accompanied by 2 additional Zelani, who had apparently traveled overnight from the Coalition embassy. Morrison met them at the landing pad, noting that while they shared the same basic physiology as the ambassador, these newcomers carried themselves differently. Their movements were more controlled, more deliberate, and their amber eyes held a sharpness that reminded him of his most experienced operators. Commander Morrison, Kira Thule said as she approached, allow me to introduce tactical analyst Zephyr Dan and systems specialist Niravel. They are colleagues from my department who expressed interest in observing your training methods. Morrison shook hands with each newcomer, noting the same surprising grip strength he'd experienced with Kira Thule. Zephyr Dan was slightly taller with darker scales, while Niravel was built more compactly, but moved with a fluid precision that caught his attention. Your department? Morrison asked as they walked toward the main facility. The Zelani Strategic Assessment Division, Kira Thule replied smoothly. We evaluate military capabilities and tactical innovations across coalition species. Yesterday's observations were quite valuable. Dr. Chen jogged over to join them, her medical scanner already active. Ambassador, I was hoping to conduct those additional physiological tests we discussed. Your colleagues are welcome to participate if they're interested. Zephyr Dan and Niravel exchanged glances with Kira Thule, some form of silent communication passing between them. That would be acceptable, Zephyr Dan said, his voice carrying a slightly different musical quality than Kira Thule's. We are curious about human assessment methods. Chief Williams appeared at Morrison's shoulder as they entered the main building. Sir, we've got a problem. Half the candidates want to attempt the obstacle course again, using the ambassador's techniques, and the other half are questioning whether human standards are actually meaningful anymore. Morrison could understand both reactions. The revelation that other species might possess military capabilities equal to or exceeding human norms was challenging fundamental assumptions about coalition military structure. For decades, humans had been the primary combat force while other species handled support roles. If that paradigm was changing, it had massive implications. Let's focus on training. Chief, we'll deal with the bigger questions after we have more data. They spent the morning touring additional facilities, with the three Zilani observing everything with scientific precision. During underwater demolitions training, Niravel made notes about human breathing techniques and suggested modifications that could improve efficiency. At the shooting range, Zephyrdon demonstrated an analytical approach to marksmanship that had the instructors asking detailed questions about targeting mathematics, but it was during the hand-to-hand combat demonstration that things became truly interesting. The session was being led by Master Chief Rodriguez, a veteran of 3 combat deployments who had trained in multiple martial arts systems adapted for military use. He was demonstrating basic defensive techniques to a group of candidates when Niravel raised her hand. Master Chief, may I ask about the biomechanical principles behind that movement? Rodriguez paused mid-demonstration. Sure. This particular technique redirects an attacker's momentum rather than trying to stop it directly. It's more efficient for smaller defenders against larger opponents. Fascinating. In Zilani movement philosophy, we have similar concepts, though the application differs due to our physiology. Niravel stepped forward. Would it be appropriate to demonstrate the comparison? Rodriguez looked to Morrison, who nodded. Always interested in different approaches, specialist. What followed was a revelation that would be discussed in military academies for years to come. Niravel demonstrated a combat system that was clearly sophisticated and highly developed, but completely unlike anything the humans had seen. Her movements flowed like water, redirecting energy and momentum with an efficiency that made their own techniques look crude by comparison. The key difference, she explained as she guided Rodriguez through a technique, is that humans rely heavily on leverage and strength multiplication. Zilani physiology allows us to store and redirect kinetic energy more efficiently through our muscular structure. Rodriguez, who outweighed the alien by nearly 200 pounds, found himself repeatedly off balance as Niravel demonstrated principle after principle. It wasn't magic or superior strength, it was pure technique refined over generations. How long have your people been developing these methods? Rodriguez asked, clearly impressed. Approximately 8,000 Earth years, Zephyrdon replied casually, though we have only recently considered their application to military operations. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. 8,000 years of martial development, and they were just now thinking about military applications? How many other coalition species had similar hidden capabilities? The demonstration continued for another hour, with human and Zilani fighters exchanging techniques and principles. The candidates watched in fascination as fundamental assumptions about combat effectiveness crumbled before their eyes. During lunch, Morrison found himself in a private conference room with the 3 Zilani visitors, trying to understand the implications of what he was seeing. I need to ask directly, he said, setting down his sandwich. Are you really diplomatic observers, or are you advanced scouts for a Zilani military program? Kirathul's scales shifted to a more neutral color. We are what we claim to be, Commander. But the lines between diplomacy and military assessment have become blurred. Recently, the Coalition Council has asked several species to evaluate their potential contributions to military operations, Zephyrdon added. The human dominance in combat roles was assumed to be due to superior capability, but recent analysis suggests it may be more due to cultural factors and opportunity. Niravel leaned forward. Your species embraced warfare as a necessity and developed accordingly. Other species avoided conflict and focused on different strengths. But conflict is no longer avoidable, and adaptation is required. Morrison absorbed this information, recognizing the seismic shift it represented. So this is about expanding coalition military capabilities beyond human forces? This is about survival, Kirathul said simply. The threats facing the coalition are growing. The hegemony forces that attacked Proxima were only the beginning. If we are to prevail, every species must contribute their maximum potential. And you believe the Zilani have been underutilized? We believe, Zephyrdon said, that yesterday's obstacle course run was merely the beginning of what proper training could accomplish. As if summoned by his words, Chief Williams burst through the door with an expression of barely controlled excitement. Sir, you need to see this. The ambassador's colleagues just attempted the underwater demolition course. He paused, struggling for words. They didn't just beat the human records. They obliterated them. Both of them. By margins that shouldn't be possible. Morrison looked at the three Zilani, seeing new depths in their amber eyes. I think, he said slowly, we need to have a much longer conversation about coalition military doctrine. The afternoon promised revelations that would reshape everything they thought they knew about warfare among the stars. The cheering gradually died down as the implications of what had just happened began to sink in. SEAL candidates who had been struggling with the course for weeks stared at Kira Thule with expressions ranging from amazement to bewilderment. Instructors who had seen every type of athletic performance imaginable found themselves questioning their understanding of alien physiology. Kira Thule stood beside the log, her breathing returning to normal with remarkable speed. Her scales had shifted to a deeper blue-green, which Dr. Chen noted seemed to indicate physical exertion in her species. Despite having just shattered a 10-year record, she appeared more curious than exhausted. That was most illuminating, she said to Morrison, who was still processing what he'd witnessed. Your training methodology is quite effective, though I believe there are some inefficiencies in technique that could be addressed. Commander Morrison blinked. Inefficiencies? Ambassador, you just broke a record that has stood for a decade, set by one of our most elite operators. Yes, but imagine what could be accomplished with proper biomechanical optimization. Kira Thule gestured toward the obstacle course. Human candidates approach each challenge as separate problems rather than viewing the course as a single integrated system. The energy expenditure is not properly distributed. Chief Williams approached, still clutching his stopwatch like a talisman. Ma'am, with all due respect, that was the most efficient run I've ever seen. How did you know to carry the log that way? That technique isn't in any of our manuals. Basic physics and anatomy, Kira Thule replied matter-of-factly. The traditional method creates unnecessary stress on the lumbar spine and wastes energy through inefficient muscle recruitment. My approach redistributed the load across the stronger muscle groups while maintaining better balance. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her medical scanner still active. Ambassador, your recovery rate is extraordinary. Your heart rate is already back to baseline and your lactate levels barely spiked during the run. Is this normal for your species? To some extent, Kira Thule admitted, her scales shifting again. Though I should mention that I may not be entirely representative of typical Zilani physiology. Morrison caught something in her tone. What do you mean by that? Before Kira Thule could answer, Lieutenant Torres jogged over from where he'd been watching with a group of other instructors. The man whose record had just been broken wore an expression of genuine respect rather than disappointment. Ambassador, that was incredible, Torres said, extending his hand. I've been trying to shave seconds off that time for 3 years. Could you show us that log-carrying technique? I've never seen anything like it. Of course, Kira Thule replied, accepting the handshake. Though I suspect your body mechanics are different enough that the exact method would need to be adapted. As Torres and several candidates gathered around to discuss technique, Morrison pulled Dr. Chen aside. What's your assessment, Doc? Is there something we're missing here? Jake, I've been thinking about that medical scan. Her physiology isn't just different from what we expected, it's different from what we've seen in other Zilani. The muscle density, the cardiovascular efficiency, the neural response times, it's like she's been optimized for physical performance. Morrison frowned. You think she's some kind of enhanced individual? I don't know. But I'd like to run some additional tests if she's willing. This could revolutionize our understanding of Zilani capabilities. Across the crowd, Kira Thule was demonstrating proper log-lifting technique to an increasingly large group of fascinated SEALs. Her explanations were precise and scientific, breaking down the biomechanics in terms that made immediate sense to the physical training instructors. The key is to engage the posterior chain while maintaining neutral spine alignment, she was saying, positioning her hands on the log. Human musculature is actually quite well suited for this approach, but your training doesn't emphasize the proper movement patterns. One of the candidates, a former college football player named Jackson, attempted to replicate her technique. The improvement was immediately obvious, even if he couldn't match her fluid efficiency. This is incredible, Jackson said. Coach, we need to add this to the training program. Chief Williams nodded slowly. I've been doing this for 15 years and I learn something new every day. He turned to Kira Thule. Ambassador, would you be willing to observe more of our training? Your insights could help a lot of candidates who are struggling. I would be honored, Kirathul replied. Though I should warn you, my presence here is not entirely for academic research. The crowd fell quiet at her words. Morrison stepped forward, his expression serious. What do you mean, Ambassador? Kirathul's scales shifted to a more neutral color, as she seemed to choose her words carefully. The Galactic Coalition has been monitoring human military effectiveness with great interest. Your species' success in recent conflicts has raised questions about the fundamental assumptions we've made regarding physical capability across different species. And, Morrison prompted, there have been suggestions that humans might not be the only species capable of exceptional military performance. Some members of the coalition believe their own people have been underutilized in combat roles due to outdated physiological assessments. Dr. Chen stepped forward. Are you saying the Zilani want to enter combat operations? Not the Zilani as a whole, no. But there are individuals within our society who believe they could serve effectively in roles traditionally reserved for humans. I am here to evaluate whether that belief has merit. Lieutenant Torres looked confused. But Ambassador, your people are diplomats and scientists. Everyone knows the Zilani aren't built for combat. Kirathul's amber eyes glinted with something that might have been amusement. Everyone knows many things that turn out to be incorrect, Lieutenant. For instance, everyone knew that a small alien diplomat could never complete your obstacle course, let alone break records. The implications of her words began to sink in around the group. Morrison found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about their coalition allies. If the Zilani had individuals capable of this kind of performance, what other assumptions were wrong? Ambassador, he said slowly, are you saying you're some kind of Zilani special forces? I am saying, Kirathul replied with diplomatic precision, that every species has individuals who exceed the expected norms. Your SEALs represent the peak of human capability. Perhaps it is time the coalition discovered what the peak of other species might look like. As the group absorbed this revelation, Morrison realized that this was far more than a diplomatic visit. Kirathul wasn't just observing human training methods, she was demonstrating that the humans might not be alone in their capacity for military excellence. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the training facility as everyone present began to understand that they had just witnessed the opening move in a much larger game, one that would reshape the military structure of the entire Galactic Coalition. Word spread through the training facility like wildfire. By the time Kirathul emerged from the medical bay with a clean bill of health, a crowd had gathered around the obstacle course. SEAL candidates, instructors, and support staff all found reasons to be in the area, pretending to go about their normal duties while stealing glances at the small alien figure. Dr. Sarah Chen, the base medical officer, jogged over to Morrison with a puzzled expression. Commander, I've never seen physiology quite like hers. Her muscle density is off the charts and her cardiovascular efficiency is incredible. It's like her entire species evolved for endurance. Is she cleared for the course? Morrison asked. Medically, yes. But Jake, her bone structure is different. Denser, more flexible. I'm not sure our safety protocols apply. Chen handed him the medical pad. Her reaction time tested 40% faster than human average, and her strength-to-weight ratio is remarkable. Morrison studied the readouts, growing more intrigued by the minute. The Zilani had always been portrayed as the intellectuals of the coalition, focused on science and diplomacy, while leaving physical pursuits to other species. Either the intelligence reports were wrong, or there was more to Kirathul than met the eye. Kirathul approached, now wearing modified training gear that had been hastily adjusted for her smaller frame. The helmet looked comically large on her scaled head, but she moved with newfound confidence. Several SEAL candidates stopped their own training to watch, whispering among themselves. Gentlemen, give the ambassador some space, Morrison called out. This is a diplomatic observation, not a circus. Chief Williams positioned himself at the starting line, stopwatch in hand. The obstacle course stretched out before them. Rope climbs, wall scaling, tire runs, monkey bars, a mud crawl, and the infamous log carry at the end. The current record stood at 4 minutes and 37 seconds, set by Lieutenant Marcus Torres 3 years ago, after months of specialized training. Ambassador, the course record is held by one of our best, Morrison explained. Don't feel pressured to complete it. This is about observation and experience. Kirathul nodded, her amber eyes fixed on the first obstacle. I understand, Commander. However, I believe in thorough research. She stepped up to the starting line and something in her posture changed. The diplomatic grace was still there, but underneath it, Morrison glimpsed something he hadn't expected. The coiled readiness of a predator. Ready when you are, ma'am, Williams said, finger poised over the stopwatch. Ready, go. What happened next defied every expectation. Kirathul exploded from the starting line with a speed that made several observers gasp. Her scaled legs pumped with mechanical precision as she sprinted toward the first rope climb. Instead of the careful, methodical approach most candidates used, she leaped at the rope and began ascending hand over hand with fluid efficiency. Jesus, someone whispered. Look at her go. At the top, she rang the bell and descended almost as quickly as she'd climbed, her three-fingered hands gripping the rope with perfect control. She hit the ground running and attacked the next obstacle, a series of walls increasing in height from 6 to 12 feet. The 6-footer she simply vaulted over. The 8-footer required a brief scramble, but she was over it in seconds. The 10 and 12-foot walls should have stopped her, but Kirathul had studied the technique of the human candidates. She used her momentum to run up the wall, grabbing the top edge and pulling herself over with a grace that made it look effortless. How is she doing that? One of the candidates muttered. I can barely get over the 12-footer, and I outweigh her by 100 pounds. The tire run came next, a zigzag pattern through heavy tires that required quick feet and perfect balance. Kirathul's alien physiology proved advantageous here, her lower center of gravity and enhanced reaction time allowing her to dance through the tires faster than any human on record. Williams stared at his stopwatch in disbelief. She's at 2 minutes, 15 seconds, and she's not even breathing hard. Morrison found himself leaning forward, caught up in the spectacle despite himself. What's her heart rate, Doc? Dr. Chen checked her medical scanner. Elevated but stable. It's like she's built for this kind of sustained effort. The monkey bars stretched ahead, 30 feet of hand-over-hand progression that had ended many a candidate's run. Upper body strength was typically a human advantage, but Kirathul approached them with the same analytical precision she'd shown earlier. Her three-fingered hands gripped each bar perfectly, and she moved across them with a rhythm that never faltered. The mud crawl was next. 50 feet of barbed wire strung 2 feet above a pit of thick mud. Candidates had to belly crawl through the muck while staying low enough to avoid the wire. It was designed to test mental toughness as much as physical ability, as the claustrophobic conditions broke many spirits. Kirathul dropped to her stomach and began moving forward with serpentine efficiency. Her scaled skin shed the mud more easily than human skin, and her flexible spine allowed her to stay lower than most candidates could manage. She emerged from the other end still moving at full speed, while the crowd that had gathered watched in stunned silence. 3 minutes, 40 seconds, Williams announced, his voice tight with disbelief. She's got 57 seconds to beat Torres's record, and there's only one obstacle left. The final challenge was the log carry, a 100-pound section of telephone pole that had to be carried 200 yards to the finish line. It was designed to simulate carrying wounded comrades, and it broke down even the strongest candidates. The weight wasn't just in the log itself, but in maintaining that burden over distance while already exhausted. Kirathul studied the log for a moment, then approached it with the same methodical precision she'd shown throughout the course. Instead of trying to heft it onto her shoulders like the human candidates did, she analyzed the physics of the situation and chose a different approach. She positioned herself beside the log, gripped it at the balance point, and lifted it in a way that distributed the weight more efficiently across her frame. Then she began to move, not with the stumbling gait most candidates showed, but with the same fluid stride she'd maintained throughout the course. The crowd fell completely silent except for the sound of her feet hitting the ground in steady rhythm. Williams stared at his stopwatch, then at the alien diplomat carrying a 100-pound log like it was a piece of luggage. 4 minutes, 10 seconds, he called out as she passed the halfway mark. She needs 27 seconds to beat the record. Morrison felt his heart racing as if he were running the course himself. Around him, hardened Navy SEALs watched in awe as the small diplomat approached the finish line with determination that would have made any of them proud. Kirathul crossed the finish line and gently set down the log, finally allowing herself to breathe heavily. The silence stretched for several heartbeats before Williams looked down at his stopwatch and announced in a voice that carried across the entire training facility. 4 minutes, 22 seconds. That's a new course record. The explosion of cheers that followed could be heard 3 buildings away, as Kirathul had just accomplished something that would ripple through military circles across the galaxy. The transport shuttle's engines hummed as it descended through Earth's atmosphere toward the Naval Special Warfare Training Center. Ambassador Kirathul pressed her scaled face against the viewport, watching the sprawling complex grow larger below. The Zilani diplomat had requested this visit months ago, claiming she wanted to observe human military training methods for her species' cultural database. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the landing pad, squinting against the shuttle's downdraft. He'd been briefed about the alien visitor but hadn't expected someone so small. When the hatch opened, out stepped a being barely 5 feet tall with iridescent blue-green scales and large amber eyes. She wore what looked like a simple gray jumpsuit, completely unremarkable except for the small translation device clipped to her collar. Ambassador Kirathul, welcome to Coronado, Morrison said, extending his hand. The Zilani took it with surprising firmness, her 3-fingered grip stronger than he'd anticipated. Thank you, Commander. I am most eager to observe your training protocols. Her voice carried a slight musical quality even through the translator. My people are curious about human military effectiveness given your recent successes in the Proxima conflicts. Morrison nodded. The Zilani had been valuable allies, providing intelligence and logistics support while staying out of direct combat. Most species in the Galactic Coalition preferred it that way, leaving the fighting to humans while they handled diplomacy and trade. They walked toward the main training facility, passing groups of SEAL candidates struggling through morning PT. Kirathul watched everything with intense interest, her amber eyes tracking the humans as they ran, climbed, and carried heavy equipment. Your species seems to enjoy suffering, she observed as they passed a group doing burpees in the sand. Morrison chuckled. We call it building character. These men are training to become SEALs, our most elite naval special forces. The dropout rate is about 70%. Fascinating. And what determines success? Mental toughness mostly. Physical strength helps, but it's the mind that gets you through Hell Week. Morrison paused at an observation deck overlooking the obstacle course. That's where we really separate the wheat from the chaff. Below them, a candidate was attempting the rope climb for the 3rd time, his arms shaking with exhaustion. He made it halfway before sliding back down, his hands too slick with sweat to maintain grip. The instructors immediately began their psychological assault, voices carrying across the training ground. You think the enemy's gonna wait for you to catch your breath, Phillips? Move your ass. Kirathul flinched at the harsh tone. This seems unnecessarily cruel. It might look that way, but there's a purpose. In combat, these men will face impossible situations. We need to know they won't break when lives depend on them. Morrison pointed to another candidate who had just completed the rope climb despite obvious exhaustion. See Rodriguez there? Yesterday he failed this same exercise 5 times. Today he made it because he learned to push past what he thought were his limits. The ambassador made notes on a small device. Your species has an unusual relationship with perceived limitations. They continued the tour, visiting the pool where candidates practiced underwater demolitions, the shooting range where precision marksmanship was drilled endlessly, and the classroom where tactical planning was taught. Throughout it all, Kirathul asked detailed questions about training methods, psychological preparation, and the philosophy behind human military doctrine. During lunch in the officers' mess, Kirathul sat quietly, observing the casual camaraderie between the instructors. These were seasoned warriors who had seen combat across 3 star systems, yet they joked and laughed like old friends. Commander, she said suddenly, I have a request that may seem unusual. Morrison looked up from his sandwich. What can I do for you, Ambassador? I would like to attempt some of your training exercises. For research purposes, of course. The mess hall went quiet. Morrison nearly choked on his food. Ambassador, I appreciate your scientific curiosity, but these exercises are designed for human physiology. I can't risk an injury to a diplomatic guest. I understand your concern, but I have studied human anatomy extensively. I believe I can adapt to your methods safely. Her amber eyes held a determined gleam. My people value experiential learning over theoretical observation. Morrison glanced around at his fellow instructors. seeing a mix of amusement and concern on their faces. The Zalani were known for their intellectual prowess and diplomatic skills, but physically they seemed fragile compared to humans. Their homeworld had lighter gravity and a more temperate climate. "Which exercises did you have in mind?" he asked carefully. "Perhaps we could start with something simple? Your obstacle course looks manageable." Chief Petty Officer Williams snorted. "Manageable? Ma'am, that course has been the graveyard of more dreams than you can count. We had a candidate last week who was a former Olympic athlete and he barely made it through." Kira Thul's scales shifted color slightly. A sign Morrison had learned indicated increased interest. "All the more reason for proper observation. How can I truly understand human training without experiencing it myself?" The debate continued for several minutes, with Morrison weighing diplomatic protocol against safety concerns. Finally, he made a decision that would change everything. "All right, Ambassador. But we do this right. Full medical clearance, safety equipment, and you stop the moment I tell you to? Deal?" "Deal," Kira Thul replied, her scales now shimmering with what Morrison was beginning to recognize as excitement. As they left the mess hall, Williams fell into step beside his commander. "Sir, you sure about this? If that little alien gets hurt on our watch..." "She's tougher than she looks, Chief. Did you see how she handled those stairs earlier? Most diplomats would have been winded, but she didn't even breathe hard." Morrison paused at the door. "Besides, it might be interesting to see what those big brains of theirs can do with our training methods." Neither of them suspected that they were about to witness something that would become legend throughout the Galactic Coalition, or that the small Zalani diplomat was about to demonstrate why humans weren't the only species capable of exceeding expectations. The afternoon sun beat down on the obstacle course as they prepared for what everyone assumed would be a brief demonstration. They had no idea they were about to watch 10 years of records crumble.